And one of the things that I've learned as I've been a part of teams traveling to listen to what's happening in other states, it really isn't about how you enter into your strategy for implementation of the Common Core. It's that you have a clear strategy. Mm-hmm. And what I've learned is that many people have been talking about a plan, right? You can get paralyzed in your planning stages of everything. And if you wait until everything's perfect, you won't get anything started. And so one of the things that we learned early on is that we needed to come together within our agency, with other partnering agencies, and come up with the best thinking that we could to put on paper to say this is where we're going to begin this conversation. We committed to a 3-year plan of action, and we brought everyone to the table to begin that conversation, and we got great agreement on where we needed to enter into the conversation, mainly because we started with a full analysis of what was working in our state. So before we decided to put pen to paper or get our plan in place, we did an analysis of what's worked well and what hasn't worked. And we reviewed our strategies, professional learning, before we began doing any work. And that allowed us to really take a closer look at what had occurred over the past 10 years. This is my second go-round at the Department of Education. And we learned a lot about putting in place systemic efforts through other major initiatives that many of us had been involved in. Reading First was an example in which I was intimately engaged in setting up a systemic structure for support for a small cohort of schools in our state, and then what it took to implement that plan successfully, and then what it meant to monitor that plan over the course of 4 to 5 years. But we also had evidence from our math and science partnerships where we had networks in place, and we began to look at what was making those networks successful as we began to implement at the local level. And all of those pieces, we collectively identified these are the 5 or 6 key things that we see that also align with what research says about scaling up professional learning initiatives in a state. And we're going to move forward with this strong theory of action in implementing our plan for Common Core implementation. And we have focused in such a way that we have not veered from that plan. Now, I say that, but we're into this process 2 years. And what we also know is really important to the successful implementation of this plan is not only the key partnerships and relationships that we have built with Postsecondary, but also our key partnerships and relationships that we have with other stakeholder groups, which we call our K groups in the state. We have worked diligently with Kentucky Education Association and our teachers union. We have worked diligently with our School Boards Association and those leaders, with our school councils, and many other organizations to make this a state conversation. And once you get all those players involved and going in the same direction, we feel like that's been one key to our successful implementation. Another key has been to be very responsive to our districts and our schools as they have implemented all along the way. One of the things that we found early on is what John has mentioned, is that we wanted to be, in the spirit of transparency, we wanted to make sure that we were very clear about where we have hit bumps in the road. And early on, as we began to initiate this work of Common Core implementation, we heard loud and clear from our districts that our networks were just had not gotten off to a good start. We had some district leaders who were upset because we started with our content teacher leaders, and you had a dynamic in place where we were building leadership in new and different ways, with having teacher leaders really have a voice in what was happening as a grassroots level. So we were building capacity in our teacher leaders, but our district leaders were saying, well, we don't know what they're learning. And we want to know what they're learning. We want to know it before they know it as well, because we were putting them in this odd situation where their teacher leaders were getting some information, quite honestly, before our district leaders were or our building leaders were. We thought we had that plan in place where they would then go back and have these conversations, because the intent was that a district capacity building model was based on district leadership teams having the capacity to pull together at the district level. But that wasn't working. And so we knew that we had to inject a little bit more support in our district leadership teams to ensure that they understood exactly what was happening in the model. One of the things that I constantly have to tell staff is that we have to make everything explicit. We can't make any assumptions about how districts are going to interpret what we intended to have happen in our implementation efforts. We're very clear at the department and in higher ed about how we want this to roll out. But there was still that disconnect with what was actually being implemented at the local level. So we had to pull back. And the first year of this work, Commissioner Holliday said, you got to get on the phone with some superintendents and some district leaders. And so for the first year, I felt like all I did was have conversations with people, day in and day out. It was a constant routine of mine, where I would have conversations with our stakeholder groups multiple times throughout the month, with district leaders, and it was always this need to get additional information and feedback so that after each monthly work session with our leaders, we would listen and we would make immediate changes in our practices the next month, so that they could see that we were being extremely responsive to their needs. And quite honestly, I think that built credibility with our districts and schools. And that is one thing that I believe has really helped us understand when you hit that bump in the road. We give a lot of lip service to being good listeners, but it matters when you begin to make changes happen, and then your leaders and districts and schools can see that you've made those changes based on what they voiced along the way. That's a part of a formative assessment process, and so we were just modeling what we were actually asking them to do based on teaching and learning at the local level, using data in a very formative way to change how we were going to provide the support necessary for implementation. And so I think that has been key, and that has allowed us the multiple opportunities to keep our districts and schools engaged in this work. And 2 years in, we still have 174 districts who are fully engaged
That's all
in
of
this
them.
work. That's all. Yeah, that's all of those districts. So we still have those districts that are fully engaged in this work. I think another thing too that we are now having conversations about is how do we bring together all the key drivers from Race to the Top. And while we did not get Race to the Top funding, you all know, we still are implementing a very aggressive reform agenda that has adhered to the tenets of Race to the Top. And Kentucky, fortunately, was able to outline a clear plan of action in our ESEA waiver request, and we were successful in being one of the first states to receive the waiver request. But one of the things that we have been working on is trying to make sure that all of this work creates a coherent picture for college and career readiness, and ensuring that this first principle outlined on implementing rigorous standards and solid assessments and a new accountability system also makes sense in what we're doing related to our teacher effectiveness work. That work is also housed in the office in which I provide oversight. It wasn't originally, and we could see these parallel paths going. And oftentimes in a state agency, never the two shall meet, right? And what we found is that once we began to put those conversations and those people in conversation with each other around this work, we began to create a more coherent picture for what it means to have all of this in place And now what are the implications for where we are in our educator effectiveness work and transforming education and teacher practice? And so we are facing that challenge and just entering into those conversations. We've been engaged for the past 2 years, but we feel like we are at a greater place now where we're gaining some momentum now that those two conversations are beginning to come closer together. So that's, I think, where I'm going to pause and just mention those are the things that we have ahead of us. We recognize that in order to have a professional growth and effectiveness system that is linked to and completely aligned with what we're doing in the standards and assessment world, but also focuses on growth of the educator, we needed to make sure that we continue our partnerships P20. And we have also had these same conversations in our early childhood arena. So when we talk about a P20 context, it is truly a P20 context in our state. We're having those very conversations about how we can transform what's happening and with our youngest learners all through post-secondary. So we understand the implications very clearly. The three of us are in constant conversation around how this one move might impact post-secondary or certification or whatever it may mean. And we believe that is what has been a key ingredient for success in our state.
I'd like to make a couple points about what Felicia has said. First, all of the work that she was talking about communicating with her districts. At the same time, our three agencies were meeting to talk about what we're communicating to our various constituencies. And we made very sure from the beginning of this work, the planning process, that our messages would be the same. Mm-hmm. That when she is talking with her school superintendents about the goals of the work and how it's going to proceed, when we talk to our education deans, arts and science deans, provosts, we talk about what KDE is doing, how it's designed, what the goal is, what the students who will be coming to you next will look like, what environment in which they have, in which they've been learning. We talked to higher ed faculty about formative assessments. We did a lot of trainings on formative assessments, what it means, because our belief was that students who come out of that kind of system have a much better chance of success in post-secondary education if those professors pick up the baton securely and firmly. Those are uncomfortable conversations, and I think you have to be prepared for that. That's not the environment in which faculty are used to operating. We were very careful not to call anything we did with faculty professional development. Wouldn't dare. Right. It was information. It was a process for moving forward. I should also point out that the learning networks she described, the teacher evaluation system she described, those all have post-secondary faculty involved. I don't think correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think in many states that post-secondary faculty, post-secondary agency people, teacher preparation people would be sitting on a panel at the Department of Education helping design teacher evaluation. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to make sure that that teacher evaluation system is perfectly aligned to preparation, so that when it's implemented, teachers are exposed to that from their first day in a teacher education program. And that kind of alignment is very crucial. Mm-hmm.